Chapter 7. Dr. Elsa Paulson intrigued me. She was tall and very polished, even regal in her white coat. She spoke with a hint of an accent that was not from New York, but not foreign either. When she walked into the pediatric diabetes clinic at Jacobi Medical Center, everybody, interns, residents, nurses, came to attention. You could tell that they wanted to please her, that she was the boss, though she was also warm and friendly. When she checked in on me, she actually talked to me, not just to my mother. Dr. Paulson was the first woman in a position of real-world authority I'd encountered. At Prospect Hospital, where my mother worked, all the doctors were men. The nursing supervisors were women, but that's as far as it went. Even at Blessed Sacrament, the nuns wielded power only over kids. To Monsignor Hart and Father Dolan, the sisters deferred. At the clinic, the nurse would weigh me and take urine samples. If I was lucky, she took my blood too. If I was unlucky, I'd have to face one of the interns doing this for the first time. Feeling now and then like a guinea pig was, in retrospect, a small price to pay for the benefit of the cutting-edge treatment being developed there by the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. They had a research program on juvenile diabetes, and considering how rare the disease was then, it was amazing good fortune that the clinic happened to be located in the Bronx, even though we still had a long subway ride and then a bus to get there. With a strong focus on patient education, the clinic was pioneering much that is now standard practice. Child-friendly lessons on how to live with diabetes, on nutrition, and what's going on in your body. Since I'd first begun treatment, my disease had progressed to the point where my pancreas was producing no insulin at all. Without my shots, I'd have been dead within days, if not sooner. The insulin available then was long-acting, a single dose given in the morning. There were sometimes unexpected fluctuations in blood sugar throughout the day, so you had to eat on a rigid schedule and keep snacks or juice on hand just in case of a sudden drop. It wasn't true that I couldn't eat sweets or that the mangoes would kill me, as my aunts warned. Fortunately, my mother had a better understanding, and we celebrated after each visit to the clinic by sharing a piece of cherry cheesecake from the hospital cafeteria. For the most part, moderation with sweets came naturally to me because I so disliked the sensation caused by a spike in blood sugar. I could recognize the first hints of that slow motion heaviness, that feeling of trying to get out of the chair with a 1,000-pound barbell on my lap. Low blood sugar felt just as bad, but in a different way. I would start to sweat and get dizzy. I would lose patience, and my thinking became fuzzy. Complicating matters, there was no easy, accurate way to test your own blood sugar back then. No glucose meter, only urine strips that reflected what your levels had been hours earlier. So to keep track of my blood sugar, I cultivated a constant mindfulness of how my body felt. Even now, with much more precise technology at hand, I can still find myself mentally checking physical sensations every minute of the day. Along with discipline, that habit of internal awareness was perhaps another accidental gift from my disease. It is linked, I believe, to the ease with which I can recall the emotions attached to memories and to a fine-tuned sensitivity to others' emotional states, which has served me well in the courtroom. But even if I took the shots like clockwork and watched my diet carefully, there was the grim reality of the disease then. I would still probably die sooner rather than later from complications. Given the advances in treatment since I was a child, a shortened lifespan is no longer as likely as it was. But that was reality at the time and explains why my family had received my diagnosis as a catastrophe of tragic dimensions. My mother's biggest fear was threat of amputations, blindness, and a panoply of other complications that were then typical. Panoply would be a good word to look up. As collected and professionally cool as she was in the emergency room, as confident and reassuring when helping a sick neighbor, she would fall apart when I was the patient. If I stubbed my toe, she'd be yelling about gangrene. Sometimes I would vent my annoyance through reckless antics on the playground, just to scare her. And always since that first day, I had asserted my independence by giving myself my own shot. My cousin Alfred was the only one who refused to believe that diabetes was a terrible disability. Perhaps that explained his drill sergeant's determination to toughen me up. It was Alfred who would get me up on a pair of skis and even put me on a horse 2 or 3 times. When he took Junior and me to the Statue of Liberty, he made us climb all the way to the crown. I was spent by the time we were scaled the pedestal, but no. Onward and upward, all the way to the top. The last flights were torture. My legs in such pain that I couldn't stop tears from coming. But no way was I going to let Alfred see me cry, which meant I had to stay ahead of him, and that's how I made it to the top. Eventually, I would translate my family's fatalism into an outlook that was better suited to my temperament. I probably wasn't going to live as long as most people, I figured, so I couldn't afford to waste time. Once in school, I would never contemplate taking a semester or a year off. Later might never come, so I'd better get to work right now. That urgency has always stayed with me, even if the threat has receded. Sitting in the waiting room at the clinic, I wondered, did it ever never occur to anyone at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine that kids who might not have long to live shouldn't have to wait endless hours with nothing to read but a stack of old highlights? I should have brought my Nancy Drew book, I grumbled. But when my turn came, they gave me something else to read, a pamphlet about choosing a profession. I am 10 years old, I thought. Isn't that a little early to be worrying about this? You can be a famous actress, the pamphlet assured me, like Mary Tyler Moore. You can be a professional athlete. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, an architect, an engineer, a nurse, a teacher. The list of possibilities for a diabetic didn't seem very long. And then, more darkly, there was a list of professions that were out of bounds. You couldn't be an airline pilot or a bus driver. Fair enough, I thought. You don't want someone flying a plane who might pass out. You couldn't serve in the military. Fine, I've had enough of boot camp for a lifetime, thanks to Alfred. And you couldn't be a police officer. Uh-oh. That one stopped me like a slap in the face. You could be a police officer? That meant you could be a detective. This was a catastrophe. It's true that Nancy Drew manages without being a police officer, but she is an exception, and she is also fictional. I knew enough about the real world to know what detectives are normally cops and not 18-year-old girls with charmed lives. And yet Nancy Drew had a powerful hold on my imagination. Every night when I'd finished reading and got into bed and closed my eyes, I would continue the story with me in Nancy's shoes until I fell asleep. I was convinced I would make an excellent detective. My mind worked in ways very similar to Nancy Drew's. I told myself I was a keen observer and listener. I picked up on clues, I figured things out logically, and I enjoyed puzzles. I loved the clear, focused feeling that came when I concentrated on solving a problem and everything else faded out. And I could be brave when I needed to be. I could be a great detective if only I weren't diabetic. Junior, change the channel. Perry Mason's on. Okay, so I couldn't be a police officer or detective, but it occurred to me that the solution to my quandary appeared on that small black and white screen every Thursday night. Perry Mason was a lawyer, a defense attorney. He worked alongside a detective, Paul Drake. But even so, it was Perry Mason who entangled the real story behind the crime, which was never what it seemed. And it was once the trial started that things got really interesting. You assume, of course, that Perry Mason's the hero. He's the one the show is named after, the one who gets the close-up shots, who wins the case almost every time, and gets the hugs and tears of gratitude at the end. But my sympathies were not entirely monopolized by Perry Mason. I was fond of Berger, the prosecutor, too. I liked that he was a good loser, that he was more committed to finding the truth than to winning his case. If the defendant was truly innocent, he once explained, and the case was dismissed, that he had done his job because justice had been served. Most of all, it was the judge who fascinated me. A minimal but vital presence, he was more of an abstraction than a character, or personification of justice. At the end of the hour, when Perry Mason said, "Your Honor, I move to dismiss the charges against my client, release him," it was the judge who made the final decision. Case dismissed, or motion granted. That wrapped up the episode. You had to watch carefully because it was over in a flash, but I knew that was the most important moment in the show. And even before the final decision, it was the judge who called the shots, who decided whether it was overruled or sustained when a lawyer said objection. There was a whole new vocabulary here, and though I wasn't sure every detail meant I followed the gist of it, it was like all the puzzles I'd enjoyed, a complex game of its own rules, and one that intersected with grand themes of right and wrong. I was intrigued and determined to figure it out. I could be a great lawyer, I decided, but part of me I knew would have preferred to be the judge rather than Perry Mason. At the time, with no knowledge of what either aspiration might entail, the one didn't seem any more outlandish than the other. Page 75.